Greetings photography buddies, and recently a number of new super telephoto zoom lenses have been making their way onto Sony's E-mount cameras. Sony's own 200 to 600mm f5.6 to 6.3 G OSS, the Tamron 150 to 500mm f5 to 6.7 Di3 VC VXD, and the brand new Sigma 150 to 600mm f5 to 6.3 DG DN OS Sports. All three lenses offer an extreme telephoto zoom range, giving you fantastic reach for all kinds of wildlife or scenic photography. All three offer moderately dark maximum apertures, which keep the size, weight and price of the lenses under some kind of control, and all three offer their own image stabilization to help you get sharper still images and smoother video footage. It's great to see competition on the market. Now, this is not a video to tell you which lens is best, because life just isn't that simple, but I'm keen to show you the differences between them so you can pick out which one is right for you and your needs. And if you want to see more detailed information about any of these lenses, then I've put links to their full reviews in the description below. Let's start by looking at their build quality. The Sony lens is the most expensive, costing $2,000 or about £1,600 in the UK, and it has by far the best build quality. Its barrel is solid and metallic, and it's the only lens here to zoom internally. That means you'll have way fewer problems with dust or moisture potentially making their way into the body, although that also makes it bigger than the other two when being stored away. Every part of the lens's fit and finish feels solid and tightly assembled, although one issue is that its tripod mount was a bit wobbly, on my copy of the lens anyway. Next up comes the Tamron lens. At $1,400 or £1,300 in the UK, it does undercut the price of the Sony lens, but is still pretty expensive. The key feature of this Tamron lens is its much smaller size than the other two, and somewhat lighter weight at well under 2 kilograms. That's a nice, unique selling point, because really it makes the lens far more portable. The trade-off, of course, is that it can only zoom into 500mm. This lens has a lot of heavy GT plastic in its body to keep its weight down, and its fit and finish feels nice, although not quite as solid as the Sony lens. Its tripod collar is particularly well designed, being easy to adjust or to take on or off. It does have some light weather sealing too. The new Sigma lens is the least expensive of all three, and it feels very similar to the Tamron lens in its build quality, although obviously it's considerably bigger and a little heavier. It's constructed of a mixture of aluminium and heavy GT plastics with weather sealing, and it also feels pretty tough, and it too has a nice strong tripod mount. Still, it doesn't feel quite as high quality as the Sony G lens. When it comes to autofocus, all three of them focus very quickly, quietly and accurately, and none of them had problems with eye autofocus or tracking subjects. The Sony lens was marginally quicker to focus than the Sigma and Tamron lenses though. When it comes to image stabilization, none of the lenses offer rock-solid stabilization when you're zoomed right in, although that would of course be a major challenge for them. The Tamron and Sigma lenses both have helpful stabilization that makes about 3 stops of difference, but the Sony lens again seemed in my tests to be just a tiny bit better in my experience when shooting video and doing still photography. So overall, the Sony lens offers the best build quality and electronics, feeling tough and precise to use, but the Tamron and Sigma lenses are not far behind at all. The bonus for the Tamron lens is its smaller size, although again, as I mentioned, it also has the most limited zoom range. Alright, let's check out their image quality now. All three lenses were tested here on a full-frame 42MP Sony a7R III camera with in-camera corrections turned on. At their respective widest angles and brightest apertures, the Sony lens seems just a little softer than the Tamron and Sigma lenses, which are both nice and sharp in the middle of the image. Over in the image corners, the Sony is the softest and the Sigma is the sharpest. Let's top them all down to f8. all three lenses see a touch more sharpness and contrast, but the overall pecking order is the same at that widest angle. Well, let's zoom in those lenses to the midpoints of their focal ranges. Now, the Sony lens is the sharpest of the three, closely followed by the Sigma, and the Tamron lags just a little behind. Over in the corners, the Sony lens is now clearly ahead of the other two. Stopping down to f8 only really seems to make a difference for the Sigma lens, which sharpens up a little, although it seems to show just a little more colour fringing than the other two lenses. Finally, let's zoom all three lenses in as far as they will go. Here, the Sony and Sigma lenses look just a little sharper than the Tamron lens, although the Sigma lens has a little colour fringing again at its brightest aperture. Let's look over in the corners. The Sony and Tamron lenses look about the same here, softer than the middle, and the Sigma is just a little sharper. Stop the aperture down to f8 and the Sony lens gets just a tiny bit sharper, but the Sigma lens is still the sharpest. Let's take a look back in the middle. Now the Sony lens wins in sharpness and contrast, closely followed by the Sigma and then the Tamron. Stop all three lenses down to f11 and the Tamron sharpens up just a little. Well, did you follow all that? The differences in sharpness really was a case of swings and roundabouts here, although there are some patterns we can notice. Firstly, the Sony was the softest lens at wide angles, but it more than made up for it when you zoom in a bit. The most consistent performance came from the Sigma lens. It couldn't quite conjure up as high contrast as the Sony lens when zoomed in, but it certainly is sharp and its corner image quality is the most consistently high. The Tamron lens performed well enough, but generally isn't quite as sharp as the other two on a full frame camera. If you'd like to see a test results on an APS-C camera, then please take a look at my full reviews, but I can tell you that the Tamron and Sony were just a little sharper than the Sigma lens there when zoomed all the way in. Now let's take a look at distortion and vignetting. Honestly, all three lenses performed very similarly here, projecting some pincushion distortion and moderate vignetting throughout their zoom ranges when in-camera corrections were turned off. However, the Tamron lens seemed to show very slightly stronger pincushion distortion than the other two at their widest angles. When it comes to working against bright lights, again, all three lenses worked well, maintaining good contrast, although the Sigma lens seemed to display just a little more flaring than the other two. Now, all three lenses offer very nice close focus distances for shooting smaller subjects, although the Sigma lens can get a little bit closer than the other two when you shoot at its widest angle. At the brightest aperture, the Sigma lens is also just a little softer than the other two, although stop down to f8 and all three are equally sharp. Finally, let's compare their bokeh. I don't really have a standardized test for bokeh to share with you. In my test pictures though, all three lenses offered nice, soft looking backgrounds, but the Sigma and Sony lenses seem to have a slight edge of extra softness in quality over the Tamron, and when it comes to quantity of bokeh, it's also worth noting that you'll be able to get slightly more out-of-focus backgrounds with the Sony and Sigma lenses because of their longer zoom ranges and slightly brighter maximum apertures. Overall then, well, here are my findings for you to see. All three lenses are great to handle and share way more in common than they have in differences. The Sony lens is best for those who have plenty of money and who want the absolute best build and image quality, and who have a nice long camera bag. The Tamron lens is the smallest, lightest and most portable of the three for adventurers going on long journeys, but it's not quite as sharp as the other two. The Sigma lens offers probably the best value for money, being almost as sharp as the Sony lens and having the best zoom range. In the UK, its price is particularly competitive. It is, of course, totally your decision which lens will be right for you. I can't pick them for you. For the record, I had the most fun shooting with a Sony lens because I loved its build quality and image quality, but if I was on a market to actually buy a Super Telephoto zoom lens, it would probably have to be the Sigma for its great zoom range and much lower price. But like I say, they each have a lot of potential to offer, so have fun making up your mind.